Welcome to Clinical Capsules from TRC Healthcare, your go-to podcast for fast, evidence-based insights. On this episode, Associate Editor and Clinical Pharmacist Vickie Danaher breaks down the latest flu vaccine updates for the 2025-2026 season, what's changed, what hasn't, and what you need to know to answer common patient questions, in an excerpt from our popular Pharmacy Essential Updates webinar series. TRC has been a trusted resource for healthcare professionals for over 40 years, and now we're bringing that expertise straight to your ears every second and fourth Tuesday in bite-sized, actionable episodes right here on Clinical Capsules. This podcast offers continuing education credit for pharmacists and pharmacy technicians. Please log in to your pharmacist letter or pharmacy technician's letter account and look for the title of this podcast in the list of available CE courses. None of the speakers have anything to disclose. Let's take a closer look.
This is always a very popular topic that raises a lot of questions every year. And this year in particular, there's been some big changes that are leading to questions from patients and other healthcare professionals alike. So our article says you'll need to be ready with guidance about flu vaccines for 2025-2026 as confusion and misinformation abound. But first, let's start off with one thing that hasn't changed this year, and that's which patients should get a flu vaccine. So explain that an annual flu vaccine is still recommended for all patients aged 6 months and older who don't have contraindications. And in terms of the flu vaccine products, all influenza vaccines in the U.S. will be trivalent again, like last season. So they'll protect against 3 different strains of flu viruses. All flu vaccines will still protect against 2 influenza A strains, which are H1N1 and H3N2, and then just 1 influenza B strain, which is B Victoria. And new for this season, the influenza A H3N2 strain is updated in all flu vaccines to try to match what flu strains will likely be circulating this year. So a key takeaway point that we can share with patients is that the flu vaccine composition is different this year, and this can be especially helpful for those patients who say they don't need a flu vaccine because they got one last year. Now, with that background, let's discuss some common big questions that come up from patients and some changes to be aware of this season. So this is one question that comes up from our patients every year. When is the right time to get a flu vaccine? So similar to last year, CDC recommends to start vaccinating most patients in September, not July or August, because of the potential for waning immunity before flu season ends. So for most people who just need 1 dose of flu vaccine, September or October are generally the ideal times to get vaccinated. And that's especially because it takes about 2 weeks after vaccination for antibodies that protect against flu to develop. So the goal really is to have patients vaccinated and protected before flu season ramps up. We know that typical flu activity can start in October and last through May, and it often peaks in February. But even though it's ideal to get vaccinated by the end of October, we still want to continue to vaccinate as long as flu is circulating and vaccine is available, since this can still provide protection, especially when flu season is ongoing. But keep in mind that there's some exceptions to this general rule of starting to vaccinate in September. For example, children aged 6 months through 8 years who haven't had at least 2 doses of flu vaccine in the past need 2 doses of flu vaccine this year, given at least 4 weeks apart. And because of that separation, CDC still recommends that these kids get their first dose as soon as possible after vaccine becomes available, to give enough time for that second dose to be received ideally by the end of October. Early vaccination can also be considered in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy to help protect the infant during the first few months of life when they're too young to be vaccinated themselves. And then for all patients, we want to make sure not to give a flu booster, regardless of when they get this year's vaccine. In adults, studies haven't shown a benefit from getting more than 1 dose during the same influenza season, even among elderly patients with weakened immune systems. So again, only 1 dose of flu vaccine is recommended each season for patients, except those children getting vaccinated for the first time. Now let's move on to another common question from patients, which is which flu vaccine is best? So, what do you think about this? And what do you tell your patients when this question comes up? And in general, the key is for patients to get vaccinated with any available flu vaccine that's appropriate for their age and health status, rather than trying to worry about which flu vaccine to get or risking not getting a flu vaccine trying to find a particular product. But there are some nuances this year in terms of the recommendations, as well as some differences between the flu vaccine products that may determine which vaccine should be given. For example, for the 2025-2026 flu season, the new Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or ACIP, recommends that only single-dose flu vaccine formulations free of the preservative thimerosal be used for children, pregnant patients, and adults. However, be aware that this decision was based on theoretical risks and concerns about cumulative exposure to thimerosal, not any new data. And several large, well designed studies in the US and other countries show no evidence of harm caused by the low amount of thimerosal in vaccine multidose vials. For example, studies have not supported claims that thimerosal in vaccines causes serious adverse effects, such as autism. And there's also no evidence that giving a pregnant patient a flu vaccine with thimerosal poses a risk to the fetus. Because of this, evidence based recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics and other medical organizations continue to support giving any licensed flu vaccine appropriate for the patient, regardless if it's in a single dose prefilled syringe or a multi dose vial. Additionally, most payers will still cover flu vaccine from a multi dose vial. Keep in mind that single dose influenza vaccines are already the most utilized option in the US. But if a multi-dose vial containing thimerosal is what's in stock, follow your state law and protocol regarding use. Most vaccine experts and clinicians would suggest not delaying vaccination if a multi-dose vial is available, since the benefits of flu vaccination, such as preventing serious complications from influenza, far outweigh any theoretical risk with thimerosal. On the other hand, we do want to respect a patient's request to specifically receive a preservative-free flu vaccine if desired. All right, so that was one consideration when it comes to choosing among flu vaccine products. Another big consideration is the patient's age. So let's talk now about which flu vaccines are preferred for patients age 65 years and up. And for these patients, we want to continue to give a higher dose or adjuvanted flu vaccine when possible. So these would be Fluzone High Dose, Flublok, or Fluad. Evidence suggests that these flu vaccines are more effective than standard dose flu vaccines for older patients, especially to reduce flu hospitalizations. Let's do a little quick review to remind ourselves how these preferred vaccines for patients age 65 and older are a little different than the others. So first, with Fluzone High Dose, it's approved for adults aged 65 and older, and it has 4 times the amount of antigen as standard dose injectable flu vaccines, with the goal of this trying to be to boost immunity in older patients since the immune response to flu vaccines weakens with age. Next is Flublok, which is now approved for patients aged 9 and older. It's a recombinant vaccine, and it has 3 times the amount of antigen than standard dose injectable vaccines. And that's why CDC is using the phrase higher dose for Fluzone High Dose and Flublok. So you might hear that terminology. And then Fluad is also approved for adults over age 65, like Fluzone High Dose. But Fluad has an adjuvant, which is an ingredient intended to help boost the immune response. So again, these 3 vaccines are preferentially recommended for patients age 65 and older, but among these 3 vaccines, there's no preference to use one over another. So you can use any of them that you have in stock. And if a higher dose or adjuvanted flu vaccine isn't available for an older patient, we still want to go ahead and use a standard dose flu vaccine instead, rather than wait and potentially miss the opportunity for the patient to get vaccinated altogether. And then, like last year, adults who are solid organ transplant recipients and who are taking immunosuppressants may get a high dose flu vaccine or adjuvanted flu vaccine as an option. So, in other words, even though Fluzone High Dose or adjuvanted Fluad are only FDA approved for patients 65 and older, they can now be given to these higher risk transplant patients based on ACIP recommendations. And in this case, there's no preference for high dose or adjuvanted flu vaccines over other standard dose injectable vaccines. It's just another option that these patients have. Okay, so much of that was similar to last year's flu season, but one key change for this season is that the recombinant egg-free flu vaccine Flublok, which was previously approved for patients age 18 years and older, can now be given to patients as young as age 9. And this is based on data demonstrating that the vaccine induces a similar immune response in these patients compared to adults without any safety concerns identified. Also, be aware that the live attenuated intranasal flu vaccine, FluMist, will still be available this year in pharmacies and prescriber offices. But new this year, it's also going to be available in some states for patients or caregivers to self administer the vaccine at home. Regardless of where it's given, FluMist is still indicated for otherwise healthy, non immunocompromised, non pregnant patients aged 2 through 49 years. And it's especially an option if the patient refuses an injection. But there are some nuances with the at home vaccine option that you'll want to point out if patients ask about it. For example, patients will need to order FluMist on the product website by completing a questionnaire, and that's going to be reviewed by a healthcare professional for eligibility. If the patient is eligible, they must pay shipping for the product to be delivered for their home. They also must refrigerate the product until they're ready to use it. And they also must return the sprayer for proper disposal to the manufacturer through a prepaid return envelope. Also explain that the at-home flu mist won't be an option for those without insurance or on the Vaccines for Children program this year. So, for these patients, as well as those who don't want to go through all the steps involved with storing and disposing of the product at home, you'll want to just recommend getting the nasal spray at your pharmacy if you stock it. And if your pharmacy does stock it, continue to administer and bill your stock of flu mist as usual. Don't dispense it for at home use and don't allow patients or caregivers to self administer it at your practice. It must still be given by a healthcare professional in these settings. Now, another group of patients that there's always questions about when it comes to getting a flu vaccine are those patients with a history of egg allergy. So, I briefly wanted to touch on this. So, if you remember, CDC updated their guidance on this about 2 years ago, and it's the same for this year as well. So, remember that patients with a severe egg allergy can get any flu vaccine in any setting. These patients are no longer limited to a medical setting like a doctor's office or a hospital. Evidence shows that patients with an egg allergy do not have a higher reaction rate compared to those without an egg allergy. And having an egg allergy alone doesn't require any additional safety measures beyond those recommended for anyone who's getting a vaccine in our pharmacy. So continue to follow your pharmacy's usual immunization protocols, such as those for screening and having anaphylaxis kits on hand. And also point out that egg-free flu vaccines like the cell-cultured Flucelvax and the recombinant vaccine Flublok are still available if the patient prefers. All right, so we talked about who should get a flu vaccine and which vaccines can be used. Now let's get a bit into the why and discuss benefits and risks. So, when one of your patients asks you how effective are flu vaccines or are flu vaccines safe, how do you respond? So, in terms of flu vaccine efficacy, explain that this varies each season, and that's based on how well the vaccines match up to the flu viruses that are circulating. So, unfortunately, we don't know how effective this year's vaccines will be until the season kind of pans out. Plus, efficacy of the vaccine for an individual patient can also depend on their age, their health status, and the timing of their vaccination. But even if we find out that the flu vaccines this year aren't well matched to circulating strains, we do know that overall flu vaccination reduces the risk of getting the flu, reduces its severity, and reduces the risk of flu related complications, including hospitalization and death. And as it relates to safety, reassure patients that mild side effects such as soreness at the injection site or fatigue may occur, but serious adverse events are extremely rare. As pharmacists and techs, we can also continue to take steps to increase vaccine confidence and decrease hesitancy, although I know this isn't always easy. So, for instance, when talking with patients about flu vaccines and any vaccine, we can use open ended questions such as what concerns you about flu vaccine or tell me more about that. We can also be listening for common misconceptions, such as the belief that the flu vaccine causes the flu or that healthy people don't need a flu vaccine. And then it's always a good idea to ask to provide facts. So, kind of getting consent from a patient to help avoid the backfire effect, where providing facts that already contraindicate the person's beliefs increases hesitancy instead of reducing it. So, for example, you could say something like, I have some information that other people have found helpful. May I share it with you? Now, we don't have time in today's session to dig too much deeper into this, but I wanted to share that we have a resource on our website called Vaccine Adherence Addressing Myths and Hesitancy that can help address common concerns and provide credible resources that can be shared with patients. And then the last flu vaccine question that we'll talk about today is whether other vaccines, such as COVID-19, RSV, or shingles vaccine, can be given at the same time as a flu vaccine. So, what do you say to patients about getting more than one vaccine at the same visit? And the answer to this hasn't changed. Patients can and ideally should get all needed vaccines at the same visit, with rare exceptions. Co-administration is generally recommended to help prevent missed opportunities for vaccination, and it hasn't been found to negatively impact efficacy or safety. Keep in mind that there's not a maximum number of vaccines that can be given at one visit, but when multiple vaccines are given, we want to make sure to administer them in different arms. Or if you need to give them in the same arm, such as in the case of a patient getting more than two vaccines, make sure to separate each injection by at least 1 inch. Also, document where each vaccine was given and even consider giving patients a vaccine map. In the event there's a local reaction, this can make it easier to help identify which vaccine may have been the culprit. Let's wrap up here with some tips to help prevent errors with vaccines. So remember to continue to store vaccines in separate bins or separate shelves with eye-catching labels. Keep in mind to slow down and double check that you're selecting the correct vaccine from your computer and fridge. Especially with flu vaccines, it can be easy to mistake all things flu, Fluarix, Fluzone high dose, etc. And then when giving vaccines, bring only the needed vaccines to the administration area for one patient at a time. Ask open-ended questions to confirm you have the right patient and the right vaccines. So you could say something like, to confirm, what vaccines are you here to get today? And then consider showing the patient the syringe before giving the injection as another check. All right, well, that's a wrap on our annual flu vaccine update. For details on specific influenza vaccine products, be sure to check out our highly popular chart, Flu Vaccines for 2025-2026, available on our website. It includes approved ages for use, dose, cost, ag and thimerosal content, and more. It's also a good idea to bookmark that page or save it as a favorite on your computer so you can have quick access during your busy workday. Also, don't forget to see our resource communicating about flu vaccination to review guidance on immunizing kids, pregnant or immunocompromised patients, and people with an egg allergy.
We hope you enjoyed and gained practical insights from listening to this episode. Now that you've listened, pharmacists and pharmacy technicians can receive CE credit. Just log into your pharmacist letter or pharmacy technician's letter account and look for the title of this podcast in the list of available CE courses. We've linked the resources we mentioned and more on today's topic right in the show notes. Those links will take you straight to our websites, where you'll find even more concise, evidence-based charts, articles, and tools. If you're not yet a subscriber, now's the time. Sign up today to stay ahead with trusted, unbiased insights and continuing education. And as a listener, you can save 10% on a new or upgraded subscription with code CC1025 at checkout. Have a question or a topic suggestion? Reach out using the Send Us a Text link in the show notes or email contact@trchealthcare.com. We love hearing from you. Thanks for listening. Stay sharp, stay current, and we'll catch you next time on Clinical Capsules.